Every December, you see him. He's everywhere on billboards, in shop windows, in our homes. That jolly, white bearded man in a bright red suit, bringing joy to millions. But what if I told you the figure we all think we know has a secret history, a past that's way older, a lot stranger, and honestly, even a little darker than you could ever imagine? Let's unwrap the real story. Because the truth is, the Santa Claus of today is a surprisingly modern invention. He's kind of pieced together over centuries from old saints, weird pagan spirits, famous poets, and yup, even advertisers. The original figure he's based on, that was something else entirely. The contrast is pretty startling, right? On one hand, you've got our familiar, warm and fuzzy icon of generosity. On the other, one of his earliest ancestors. In places like Hungary, the original gift giver was known as Lanchos Miklos, which means chain-rattling Nicholas. He was this fearsome figure who roamed the streets judging the wicked, and you knew he was coming by the sound of his rattling chains. So how in the world did we get from a terrifying punisher to a jolly old elf? To find out, we have to go back to the very beginning. See, this story doesn't start at the North Pole. Not even close. It starts under the blistering sun of the Roman Empire, with a real man whose life of radical generosity would end up echoing for nearly 2,000 years. This is Nicholas. And yeah, he was a real person, born in the Roman Empire in what is now modern-day Turkey. As the Bishop of Myra, he got this reputation for being incredibly kind, so much so that he was actually imprisoned for his faith during some really brutal persecutions. But it was his death on December 6th that truly cemented his legacy, turning that specific date into a day of celebration and gift-giving for centuries to come. So what exactly made this bishop the patron saint of children and gift-giving? Well, it all comes down to one legendary act of kindness. The story goes that Nicholas found out about a poor man with 3 daughters who couldn't afford their dowries. This was a crisis back then. It meant they were facing a life of being sold into prostitution. So for 3 nights in a row, Nicholas secretly tossed a bag of gold through their window. This one act of anonymous, life-saving generosity, that became his signature. It was the very seed from which our entire myth would grow. And this is where things start to get really wild. As the story of St. Nicholas spread all across Europe, he began to change. I mean, the legend wasn't just retold, it was completely remade. Each culture put its own unique spin on the guy, transforming him into a whole cast of very different characters. The Dutch imagined him as Sinterklaas, a very formal bishop who arrives, get this, on a steamboat from Spain. The English merged him with an old pagan spirit to create Father Christmas, who was originally all about adults feasting and having a good time. And in Finland, he kept a name from his pre-Christian past, Joulupaki, which literally translates to the Yule goat. For centuries, all these different Santas existed at the same time, until immigration brought them all to one place. And the place where all these different threads finally came together was, you guessed it, America, specifically 19th century New York. In a nation of immigrants all looking for new shared traditions, a stern saint and a rowdy partygoer were about to be transformed into the jolly old elf we know today. You can almost think of the modern Santa as being built in 3 key steps. First, in 1809, the writer Washington Irving took the Dutch Sinterklaas and gave him his American name, Santa Claus. Then, about 20 years later, a famous poem gave him his magic, the sleigh, the reindeer, the whole trip down the chimney. And finally, in the 1880s, a cartoonist named Thomas Nast gave him his face, drawing that jolly, red-suited, North Pole-dwelling figure that we would recognize instantly today. I mean, just think about how powerful this one line was. Before this poem, the gift giver was a serious bishop, or a wild goat spirit, or a lord of the feast. Moore's poem single-handedly transformed him into a jolly old elf, making him magical, approachable, and focused entirely on the happiness of children. This was a complete and total rebranding. So, with the character and the look pretty much established, there was just one final step, taking this American icon and making him a global superstar. And this is where one of the most persistent myths about Santa Claus comes into play. A lot of people believe that Coca-Cola invented the modern Santa, or at least his red suit. But, as we just saw, that's just not true. Thomas Nast had already been dressing him in red and white back in 1881, a full half-century before those famous ads ever came out. So, what was Coke's actual role in all this? Well, their contribution was all about consistency. Starting in 1931, an illustrator named Haddon Sundblom created these ads for Coca-Cola that featured the same warm, friendly, grandfatherly Santa year after year. As mass media exploded, these ads ran for decades in magazines all over the world, cementing Nass' version as the one and only Santa Claus in the global imagination. They didn't invent him, they perfected the brand. And so, after nearly 1,700 years of evolution, all the different pieces were finally in place, all of them coming together to create the fully formed legend that we share with our children today. So let's assemble the final product, shall we? The secret gift-giving comes from a 4th century Turkish bishop. The sleigh and reindeer from a 19th century American poem. His home at the North Pole and that iconic red suit come from a political cartoonist. And his global recognition was supercharged by a soft drink company. Heck, even Rudolph was a late addition, created in 1939 for a department store coloring book. Our Santa is a total patchwork of history. The story of Santa Claus is really a story of constant evolution. He has always changed to reflect the values and the imagination of the time. Which leaves us with one final thought. As our world continues to change at lightning speed, who is he destined to become in the centuries ahead?